Hello YouTube, Dave here again. The Tyranny of Dragons story was the first major storyline released for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. It was the inaugural campaign that took players from levels 1 all the way up to level 15 and was told over the course of 2 separate books, being the first Horde of the Dragon Queen, followed by The Rise of Tiamat. Both these books came out back in 2014 and they sort of launched alongside of the 5th edition rule set itself. There's always been sort of a mixed reaction towards the Tyranny of Dragons story, I find. Even myself, I've ranked Horde of the Dragon Queen in particular kind of low on my list of what I would consider to be the better adventures released for D&D 5th edition. With Rise of Tiamat, being much higher up on that list. Now, that said, I've always had sort of an interesting history with this campaign. I've actually tried to run Horde of the Dragon Queen on 3 separate occasions, and various real-life events have sort of come up to make things a bit difficult. The first attempt was with an online group that were interested, but trying to schedule everybody across North America was kind of impossible. In fact, one of my players was actually European, and it just made things really, really rough, and we got a few sessions in. I think we actually completed the first 3 chapters, but then it just sort of fell apart after that. We just couldn't continuously get together. And then another attempt was with a group of players, just a pair of players, but we got someone else that was looking to join, so we kind of tried to reboot it, but then I ended up moving, so that kind of threw that aside. But the location for Horde of the Dragon Queen, where the adventure starts, has always been something that I've kind of worked into a lot of the campaigns that I have run since. In one group, I had the players actually become the owners of the keep in the middle of Greenest, and they sort of became like the lawmakers or the people who would decide on disputes and stuff. And that was actually one of my favorite adventures that I ever ran. Started with them allocating resources like guards or soldiers, and just disputing or resolving disputes amongst the locals. It was actually really, really fun. In my most recent 5th edition campaign, I had a very abridged version of Rise of Tiamat, with the area of Greenest being attacked, and in this case completely destroyed because there were no player characters or heroes to stop it from happening. And when the player characters do get there, they discover that the Cult of the Dragon is attempting to summon not Tiamat herself, but an aspect of Tiamat, which is a manifestation of her divine power. So even though it's sort of one of the lesser regarded storylines, maybe one of the ones that hasn't held up as well as maybe some of the others, I've always considered Tyranny of Dragons to be what I would call a flawed classic. The Rise of Tiamat in of itself is a very, very solid book, but the Horde of the Dragon Queen had some issues with it. With the opening, with the massive dragon attacking the town and a group of first level characters expected to run into the town being attacked by the massive dragon instead of as far away from the massive dragon as they could possibly get, considering that a single lightning breath blast could instantly kill the entire party. So just that was always an issue that I would change every single time that I ran it. There was also a little bit of railroading that's kind of heavy-handed at some points throughout the adventure, and then there was the lengthy travel sequence that a lot of people sort of took exception to, and that's actually where my longest running version of Horde of the Dragon Queen kind of died, because it just wasn't a fun section necessarily to go through, and ultimately it didn't really advance the plot too much because it was literally just getting from point A to point B, and then I think to like point C. But that said, I was still very excited when I heard that Wizards of the Coast was going to be re-releasing the Tyranny of Dragons story combined into one hardcover. And even more thrilled when I read on the website that they were going to have a reworked and redone opening chapter, or introductory chapter, to the adventure. So I was really looking forward to see how that went. So as soon as I had the funds to do so, I ran out and I picked up the Tyranny of Dragons hardcover. So Did they change anything? What was fixed? They did incorporate the errata, although I'm having trouble finding the actual errata for the adventure. So what I'm going to do is just sort of flip through this a little bit. I'm not going to go through every single page, and I'll give you my thoughts on what they did well, what maybe could have been done better, and we'll sort of go from there. Alright, so we'll start with the little flip through. Like I said, I'm not going to go through every single page, but we're just going to go over sort of what we have here. So the first part is the introduction, and this is the new reworked intro chapter for the book. It's not they reworked the introduction to the adventure itself, they reworked the intro to the book. Although from what I can tell, it looks like they just simply combined the overview sections of both books into one section at the very beginning, instead of having the Cult of the Dragon, or having the Horde of the Dragon Queen stuff take place right before Horde of the Dragon Queen, and then have the overview for Rise of Tiamat at the start of that adventure later in the book. So they just combined everything into one. I actually had thought that this section here with the villains and the allies was new, because I don't remember seeing it in the original books, but it was actually included in the Rise of Tiamat. And I think the reason I didn't recognize it is because while I've started running Horde of the Dragon Queen on a few different occasions, I never did actually get a chance to run any of Rise of Tiamat, so I just haven't looked through it. Like after I did the review for it, honestly, I don't think I looked through it again until now. It's been that long. And then we have the adventures themselves, and the adventures are essentially, from what I can tell, are directly copied from the original book. So it doesn't look like there's anything that's been changed. The opening blurb at the beginning of this book did say that there were going to be like sidebars and stuff that were added based off of reader feedback, but I honestly haven't found any of them flipping through the book yet. Everything that I see here seems to be exactly as it was in the original books. So I'll sort of give you more of my thoughts on that a bit later on. But we've got the Horde of the Dragon Queen section here, which ends with the Cloud Giant's castle. Followed by, which we haven't actually gotten to yet. But so we have the original Horde of the Dragon Queen here, which has some interesting aspects to it. There are some really, great ideas. There's some cool concepts. The execution was a little bit to be desired, but overall, a decent story here. And then we get into the Rise of Tiamat as well. As you can see, there is some nice art in this book, but these books were a little, thin on having art added into it. So there's a lot of pages with just, text and stuff like that. But regardless, we still have, the adventure itself in its entirety. We have the appendices, which includes all the the monsters, magic items, character background stuff that you may want to introduce. And then we have a really cool section here. Actually, we have a concept art gallery that has some artwork that was done for the Tyranny of Dragons story, even if it wasn't incorporated into the actual books itself. These could be done from other sources, like there was an online webcomic sort of thing. Then there was just other promotional images. So we got some really cool stuff here. So we have the invasion of Icewind Dale, the attack on Luskan, and those are two of my favorite locations as well. The Siege of Neverwinter, and these are all labeled if you're wondering where I'm getting that information from. I'm not just assigning it myself. Then we have the assassination in Waterdeep, and this one's actually kind of cool because you have the assassinated victim, obviously, and then you have everybody looking around and they're sort of in shock of what they're seeing. But then you have the recruiter for the Cult of the Dragon, and rather than looking at the assassinated body, she's literally staring at you. So when you first look at the pages, that's a little bit, I guess you could say, unnerving. Whoops. To see that. So, but just really, just a nice little bit of art, and the blood splatter also is in the shape of a dragon, which I thought was also really, really cool. Then we have the battle at Tiamat's temple. Another one here, the coup at Dragonspear Castle. And this is also kind of neat because Dragonspear Castle was used for the Acquisitions Incorporated portion of the Tyranny of Dragons story, which was kind of cool. I actually really enjoyed that video with them playing at that location, so just awesome stuff there. And then we have like the concept art itself. So we got some stuff here for the Red Wizards, the different like Zentara members, as well as Dread Warriors, which are like undead warriors created by the Red Wizards. Then we have the dragon masks. So we have the combined form, as well as what each individual mask looks like as well before it's combined together. And then just some ideas on what members of the cult might look like at different levels of prestige, I guess you could say, within it. And just another nice little cool detail that, again, never really factors into the adventure, but it's nice to see the kind of details that were considered when all this started. But you have like the glove and hand tattoos. So the tattoo itself sort of depicts what dragon you're sort of loyal to, which is kind of neat. And you have like the red, blue, white, or green, sorry, white and black. And there we have the dragon recruiter in her formal wear, which we saw in the assassination artwork, as well as in her just regular street clothes. Then we have like Tiamat's Temple, Icewind Dale, Waterdeep, and we also have the character Drizzt in here, which Drizzt is one of my favorite characters. I love the novels, and you know, if you don't like it, then you don't like it, that's fine, but I do, so I do. But what's actually kind of neat is they even went through the process or the trouble of like coming up with a pattern for the fabric on the inside of his cloak, which just seems like a really weird attention to detail, as well as what the what the sword handle looks like. So just again, just really weird attention to detail, but still cool stuff overall. Then we have some other NPCs, people of the Sword Coast. And then we have a section that I was completely not expecting. This is a bunch of artwork by Todd Lockwood, and these were done for the 3.5 book Draconomicon, which came out in like 2004, 2005 maybe. And it's just really, I never expected, because Todd Lockwood hasn't worked with Wizards of the Coast, at least on D&D stuff, since then, since the 3rd edition era. So I was just really not expecting to see this here, but a lot of these sketches are his, and you can tell that they are from something that predates 5th edition D&D by some of the terminology that's used. So for example, we have Red Great Worm as like the oldest category of dragon, and we see Great Worm kind of throughout some of these books. Some of these pages, and Great Worm hasn't been used to describe like the most ancient and powerful dragons since 3rd edition. Starting with 4th edition and carrying over into 5th edition, we have ancient dragons as like the most powerful versions. So it's kind of nice to see the Great Worm term back in a modern D&D book, even if it's just a callback based off concept art from years ago. We got the red dragon, we got the blue dragon. I actually really like this red dragon sleeping. Some of these things I don't think actually appeared in Draconomicon. Like, I don't actually remember seeing that piece of art before. So that may have been one that was done for the book, but just never actually made it. So it's kind of cool that we're seeing it here now. We got the blue dragon. And then we have the green dragon, although oddly enough, the green dragon has like the green dragon frills here, but it has the black dragon horns. So I'm not quite sure. I think that was just a little bit of a mix-up, or they may have taken this from the... Oh no, that's actually not even the green dragon frills, because they sort of taper down, whereas with the green dragon they keep going. So I think that one was just put in the wrong place, pure and simple, because we do have the how they look when they're taking a breath while submerged. We have that for green and for black, so I think that just went on the wrong page, maybe. But I'm okay with that because black dragons are my favorite looking dragons, so if I get to see more of them, then I'm happy with it. And again, we've got great worm, and just really, really cool. And who wouldn't love a little black dragon wormling? I mean, come on. Tell me that's not adorable. And then we got the white dragon on the back. So overall, what are my thoughts on the Tyranny of Dragons collected hardcover? Honestly, I am sort of on the fence right now. I was super excited when I first purchased it because I was really looking forward to seeing what they may have altered, because again, I think there was potential to really fix some of the more major issues with the book. Just by making a few small changes, or at the very least, if you're going to talk about having sidebars and stuff like that, then it would have been nice to have had those sidebars to sort of go over what maybe the philosophy was behind designing it the way that they did. But really, this is essentially just copied and pasted from the original 2 hardcovers. And I didn't see any appreciable changes or alterations. It does incorporate the errata, but errata typically are things like maybe challenge rating numbers or DC numbers, or things like spelling errors and stuff like that. So it's not going to have a huge impact overall. It is a good story, and I will continue to say that. A flawed classic, I think, is the way that I'm still going to look at this. The story itself is, for 5th edition, it feels like a unique story. I can't place my finger on any other of the major iconic D&D adventures that this would have been an update of. This does seem like it is a unique story for 5th edition, which is something that doesn't happen a lot with 5th edition, with most of its stories being based off things like Ravenloft, Against the Giants, Tomb of Horrors, Elemental Evil, just the classic dungeon crawls, the Salt Marsh adventures and other sort of sea-based things. So this being a relatively unique story at the very least is kind of refreshing. And for its flaws, none of them are difficult to fix, at least in my opinion. And the flaws really only exist, in my opinion, in the first little bit of, like, the first half of Horde of the Dragon Queen. The part with the characters, first level characters, finding the town being attacked, and then expecting your players to run towards it when it's being attacked by a huge blue dragon, is something that I can see being problematic. And most people that I've talked to that we sort of discussed that intro agreed that it would have made more sense if the players started in the town and even had a chance to roleplay with some of the NPCs, so that way they have sort of a bit of an investment in the health and safety of these NPCs, and gives them a reason to fight these invaders because they're just sort of caught in the middle, rather than charging recklessly into a situation which on paper looks like absolute suicide if they were to do that. Other railroaded elements do exist, but again, some of them are kind of easy to fix, and some of them are a little bit more subtle. Asking the players to scout out the Cult of the Dragon camp, for example, is something that just seems logical, so I don't really have as much issue with that, but I wouldn't stop the players from trying to do the things that they feel they need to do to infiltrate the camp. For example, if they do find Cult of the Dragon members and defeat them and wear like their robes and stuff like that, I would let that succeed, whereas the book says that anyone dressed formally would raise suspicion. Which also makes a little bit of sense, but one of the first things that the players may think of is to attack members of the cult and steal their clothes and pose as them. And just let them do it, I guess would be my advice there. And the other major issue is the travel sequence. So there's one, Chapter 4 of the Horde of the Dragon Queen, I think like Chapter 4, 5, and maybe even 6, has the characters following this caravan that Cult of the Dragon members are using to masquerade as merchants and traders, when really they're just using the wagons to move their stolen goods. And the idea behind the section, I think, is solid. And in the beginning, especially with stuff like the Ranger class, they really wanted to place an emphasis on travel and not have travel be something that you just sort of gloss over because it's, slow and tedious and plodding and boring. The problem is that the travel sequence is kind of slow and tedious and plodding and boring. There are some interesting encounters, so if you do plan on running it, my advice would be to pick the 2 or 3 of the encounters that you like the most, run those, and then skip ahead to the next major story-related section, because I think it will help the adventure flow a lot better if you just have a couple of encounters on the road, and then you're right back into like the serious meat and potatoes of the story. The rest of it, however, from the travel sequence on, I think is incredibly solid. And I feel like there may be some people who just couldn't get past the early blemishes on the Hoard of the Dragon Queen to get to the really great stuff that takes place later on. So this book is a chance to sort of right that wrong, I guess. And I wish it had been the developers that did it. I wish it had been the Kobold Press or Wizards of the Coast that said, these are the common complaints that we've heard as feedback for this adventure. So what we need to do is fix that and present a better tailored experience, I guess, to what our consumers have said that they've wanted. So it feels like a slightly missed opportunity there. That said, it is a great story. If you've never played through or you never picked up the Tyranny of Dragons books, because maybe you didn't want to have 2 different books from one story or whatever the case may be, I do recommend picking this up. If you're someone who is picking this up because you hoped that they had made some alterations, then I think you're going to be disappointed, because there are no alterations. It is exactly what they said it is. But I will say Wizards of the Coast should have been a little bit more clear about what this altered, reworked intro chapter was, and maybe had gone into a little bit more detail there, because I wasn't the only one that thought they fixed the opening chapter with the adventure itself, with the dragon attack on Greenest. So that's something that maybe, again, clearer communication would have been better for. I'm hoping that they didn't put that in there and leave it vague, hoping that that would push sales. I don't want to be that cynical, so I'm hoping that that's just not the case, but I think it's something that Wizards of the Coast really should have been a little clearer about. But overall, like I said, Tyranny of Dragons is a flawed classic, but none of the flaws are so difficult to deal with that it wouldn't take just a few minutes of changing a couple things around. So ultimately, I think that people should give this story a try. They should try to see it through to the end if possible, because I think it is deserving of that. And the later stuff, in my opinion, is so good, with the player characters going around trying to recruit allies and stuff like that, and seeing how their actions pay off at the very end of the campaign is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Beautifully designed. And I feel like they're just people that never got a chance to experience it because of the issues with the early stuff. So I say give it a chance if you haven't already. Now, for those of you watching, have you played through the Tyranny of Dragons story? Let me know in the comments below. What were your thoughts? How was it run for you? Did your DM run it exactly as it was written in the book? Did they change the intro? Did they change the travel sequence? Let me know sort of what your experiences were. And one last thing I will say is that the cover of the brand new book is also incredibly beautiful. So if you haven't picked up the story, if you haven't picked up the 2 books, then picking this 1 book up, I think, is a very, very worthwhile purchase. And also, because it's an alternate cover, it is only available at your friendly local game store. So visit your local game store, help support them, and pick up, again, what is a classic adventure with a few early blemishes and flaws that might sort of dissuade people. Persevere, make slight, small, really easy to make changes, and I think you're going to have a great time. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know what you think about the story, the adventure, and if you picked up this book, let me know what your thoughts on this book are in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.